throughout history, different groups of people, different religions, different cultures have had different views of God. One view of God is called Pantheism, and this view might be the same as in Taoism in China, that God is all of nature. And if you have this view of God, then God is everywhere around us all the time.
Discovering the Creation of the Universe and the Divine. Interview with Dr. Alan Lightman, Part 1 of 3. Continue watching to find out more.
Yahweh means hello in Marshallese. I'm Felix. The people of the Marshall Islands are deeply touched by your inner longing to connect with the divine. We wish that you experience quick progress in your spiritual journey and grow in wisdom every day. Welcome to part 1 of our 3-part series, Discovering the Creation of the Universe and the Divine. Interview with Dr. Alan Lightman. Dr. Lightman is a distinguished physicist and a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, USA. He is also an international best-selling author whose books include Three Flames, The Accidental Universe, The World You Thought You Knew, and Einstein's Dreams. Dr. Lightman is the founder and chairman of the Harpswell Foundation, an organization that helps to empower women in Southeast Asia. Dr. Lightman has conducted extensive research on the correlation between science, philosophy, and spirituality, and his work encompasses the teachings of many religions. On today's program, he explains the difficulty of proving God's existence through scientific means.
The question of whether science can prove or disprove the existence of God, and whether the instruments that we have built are detecting some energy or force that represents God. I think this really depends upon your definition of God. Throughout history, different groups of people, different religions, different cultures have had different views of God. One view of God is called Pantheism, and this view might be the same as in Taoism in China, that God is all of nature. And if you have this view of God, then God is everywhere around us all the time. So it really depends upon what your understanding of God is. If you have the view that God is an intelligent being who created the universe, I think that God cannot be proved or disproved by science, because science can never say exactly what created the universe. Even if physicists can have a theory of quantum gravity which shows how the universe came out of a quantum fluctuation before the Big Bang, then what created the laws of physics? We can never know. So I think that particular view of God as a being that created the universe is one that science cannot prove or disprove, meaning that we have to take our belief in God as a matter of faith. On the other extreme, if you have a view of that God is present in all of nature, then with that view of God, everything that we see is proof of God. Just breathing the air, seeing the sun, seeing the stars, falling in love, all of that would be proof of God with that particular definition of God.
Science seeks to explain the universe and other physical phenomena through various tests and experiments using fundamental laws or principles, but some phenomena are inexplicable through scientific methods.
There are still many fundamentalist religions that view God as an intelligent being that purposely created the universe, and even that sometimes intervenes to perform supernatural events. I mean, there's supernatural events in Judaism, the parting of the Red Sea, in Islam, the splitting of the moon by Muhammad. There are Christianity, the resurrection of Christ. These are all supernatural events which by definition have a conflict with science.
For many years, scientists have wondered how the stars and the rest of our universe came into being. One theory that many scientists support is the Big Bang Theory, which states that everything started from a singular event and expanded from there. How did this theory first come into being?
In the 1920s, we had evidence that the universe is expanding, and we saw that the galaxies were all moving away from us, and they were moving at a speed proportional to their distance. That is, galaxies twice as far away were moving twice as fast away from us. And that is exactly the picture that you get if you put dots on a balloon and started blowing up the balloon. From the point of view of each dot, it would appear that all of the other dots are moving away from it, and they would move at speeds proportional to their distance. So that led to the picture of an expanding universe. Now we can take that picture and play it backwards. From the rate at which the universe is expanding now, we can calculate a time in the past when the balloon first began expanding. And that's about 14 billion years ago. So we believe that that was when our universe began. That also agrees with the ages of the oldest stars that we can see through our telescopes. We can actually give ages to stars by their chemical composition, and combining that with our theories of nuclear physics, we can determine how old stars are. Some stars are young and some are old, but the oldest stars have ages that are a few 100 million years old after the Big Bang. So all of that is an agreement, leads us to a theory that the universe began about 14 billion years ago. I should say our universe, because there could be other universes. So there are several independent lines of scientific evidence that suggest that our universe began about 14 billion years ago, called an event called the Big Bang. All of the scientific evidence now is the universe will keep expanding forever. Now, 30 or 40 years ago, there were some scientists who did believe that our universe would reach a point of maximum expansion and then would start collapsing and coming back together again. But that theory has been ruled out by observation and evidence.
Intelligent viewers, we'll now take a moment for an important message and be back shortly. Please stay tuned to Supreme Master Television. Welcome back as we continue our discussion with Dr. Alan Lightman, who will next tell us about string theory. First developed in the 1970s, this theory states that the universe is not solid, but rather made up of vibrating strings of energy that connect and intertwine with one another in every direction.
String theory believes that the smallest elements of nature are not particles, but tiny one-dimensional vibrations of energy. If we could look at the universe at very, very, very tiny scales, then yes, it would be like a big symphony. But the size of one of these strings is billions of times smaller than an atom. It's very, very, very small. So in practice, we would never be able to examine the universe at such a tiny scale. But if we could, yes, we would see that everything is vibrations of energy. We can certainly measure vibrations on larger scales. We can't measure them at these ultra tiny scales because we don't have instruments with enough energy to measure at such tiny scales. But we can measure atoms vibrating at that scale. But when you get much, much smaller than atoms, we do not have sufficient instruments or energies to be able to measure those vibrations.
Is our universe the only one in existence? Not according to scientific theory. In fact, our universe may be only one of many, perhaps even an infinite number of universes. This concept is called Multiverse Theory.
The multi-universe is a large collection of many, many universes that are out of communication with each other, but each one would have its own laws of physics. Each one would have its own nature. Some of those universes would have life. Some of them would not have life. Some of them would have planets and stars. Other ones would just be pure energy. So a vast range of different properties in the different universes. And physicists believe that the multi-universe exists. Some of our theories suggest that there could be these other universes, but we have no way of proving that because we can't communicate with these other universes.
In a March 6, 2014 speech given at the Concord Bookshop in Concord, Massachusetts, USA, Dr. Lightman further explained this concept.
What we now believe, and we've been forced to this belief for reasons I'll mention, is that our universe is just one of zillions of universes. It's called the multiverse, this concept that there are zillions of other universes. And these other universes have very different properties than ours. Some might have 17 dimensions instead of 3. And some, the speed of light might be the same speed as a turtle instead of very, very fast. And some of these universes might have the conditions that allow for planets and stars to form and life to form. And other of these universes might not have those special conditions that allow stars and planets to form. All of these universes, different universes, start from the same fundamental principles, and yet there are many, many different possibilities. There are two possible explanations for that. One is that the universe was created by some intelligence, some intelligent being that wanted the universe to have life in it, and therefore chose these parameters, such as the strength of the nuclear force and the amount of dark energy, to have the right value to allow stars to form, to allow complex atoms to form, to allow the Earth to form, and other planets to allow life to form. That's one explanation. The other explanation is called the multiverse, and that is the idea that in addition to our universe, there are many, many other universes with different properties. Some of them have a nuclear force which is much weaker than the nuclear force in our universe. Some of them have a nuclear force which is much stronger than the nuclear force in our universe, and so on. And that in most of those other universes, life cannot start. But in some of them, the conditions are right for life. And we happen to live in one of the universes in which the conditions are right for life. And that explanation is very similar to the explanation for why it is that our planet Earth, which is only one of billions and billions of planets in the universe, why does it have the right conditions for life? You know, we have a nice atmosphere of oxygen, we have liquid water, so if we were further away from the sun, the water would freeze, and if we were closer to the sun, it would boil away because it would be too hot. Why are these conditions so favorable for the existence of life on Earth? And the answer to that question, scientists believe, is that there are lots and lots and lots of planets in the universe at different distances from their suns and with different atmospheres, and only some of those planets have the right conditions for life. We know, for example, that in our own solar system, our planet of 9 planets appears to be the only one that has the right conditions for life. So that explanation for why the conditions on Earth are favorable for life is very similar to the multiverse explanation of why the universe as a whole has the right conditions for life. That in fact, there are many, many other universes in which life never would have formed, that don't have the right conditions. So you can choose which explanation that you favor. The accidental universe is like the Johnny Appleseed situation. Of course, you can ask, who threw out the apple seeds?
Dr. Lightman explains that for life to exist, atoms are required. With even a slight alteration in this microcomponent, life as we know it will not have come into being. But where do atoms come from?
What we do think is that life requires atoms, and not just atoms, but large atoms, complex atoms. We can't conceive of any life that does not involve atoms, and you need stars to make atoms. All of the atoms in our bodies, except the lightest atom, hydrogen, all of those atoms, the carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, iron, all of those atoms in our bodies were actually made in stars, which is an incredible thought. If you could follow each one of the atoms in your body backwards in time, at one time it was part of the soil, at one time it was part of the air, at one time it was part of the ocean, then it was part of the gas that swirled around and formed planet Earth, then it was in outer space. Eventually it would have ended up in a star, because what stars do is they take the lightest atoms, hydrogen, which were there from the Big Bang, and they fuse them together to make larger atoms like carbon and oxygen. And then some of those stars explode, and those atoms are spewed out into space, and eventually they start drawing together and coalescing to form a solar system, which forms ocean and air and soil and eventually living creatures. So all of the atoms in our bodies except for hydrogen were made at the center of stars. We do think that atoms are necessary for life, even life very, very different from our own life. And therefore, we need the right conditions in a universe to make stars.
How fascinating to think that we all had our origin in the stars. We'll take a moment now to listen to an important message, and we'll be back shortly. Please stay tuned to Supreme Master Television. Brilliant viewers, welcome back to our program. According to the U.S. National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, everything we can observe, the Earth, the planets, the Sun, the stars, etc., comprises less than 5% of the entire universe. What makes up the rest? Scientists have determined that much of the remainder, roughly 68%, is what is called dark energy.
Dark energy is an energy that we have observed, and it's throughout the universe. It's everywhere, and it is a kind of gravity that unlike normal gravity, instead of pulling things together, it pushes things apart. So the dark energy that we have observed with our telescopes by measuring the way galaxies are moving, it appears that galaxies are accelerating away from each other as if someone is putting their foot on the accelerator pedal. They are moving away from each other faster and faster and faster. And we attribute that to this unusual kind of energy called dark energy, which acts like an anti-gravitational force. It pushes things apart rather than pulls things together. So we have observational evidence for this dark energy, and we can actually measure it, how much there is per cubic centimeter of space. We're not sure exactly what caused it, but we know that it's there in our universe. And just dark energy was discovered only recently in 1998. And before that, we didn't know there was any dark energy. We thought that the universe was slowing down in its expansion. But in 1998, we discovered that the universe is actually speeding up in its expansion, and that was evidence for dark energy.
Dr. Lightman believes that science is never static, but instead is a work in progress. As new discoveries are made, scientific theories continue to change and evolve.
Yes, science is always evolving. And I like to think of science as an enterprise in which we are getting better and better approximations to nature. Every theory that we have in science will someday be revised as we discover new things about nature.
Dr. Lightman, a founder and chairman of the Harpswell Foundation in Cambodia, next talks about how this humanitarian project started.
Around 2003 or 2004, I was in Cambodia and I met a Cambodian woman named Viasna, who told me that when she had been going to university in the mid-1990s, that she and other female students had to live underneath the building because there was no housing for female university students. The male students could live free in the Buddhist pagodas or safely rent rooms together, but those options were not open to female students. So Viasna and I came up with the idea of building dormitories for female university students. And I came back to the United States and raised the money to do that. And so the organization that I started to do that, called the Harpswell Foundation, has built a couple of dormitories for female university students in Cambodia. And we've also have developed an in-house academic program for these young women that stresses critical thinking and leadership. One of the central beliefs of Buddhism is that everything is impermanent, that everything is passing away. And one thing that we've learned from science is that everything is impermanent. We once thought that atoms were indestructible, and now we know that atoms can be split. We once thought that stars were permanent and eternal, and we now know that stars eventually use up their nuclear fuel and burn out. So even in science, we've learned that everything in nature is impermanent. Energy and matter, the two combined, cannot be created or destroyed, just transformed. When I say that everything is impermanent, I mean that all structures are impermanent. Every structure will eventually disintegrate.
Since matter cannot be destroyed, what happens to the physical elements in our body when we pass away? Dr. Lightman explains.
When we die, my view is that the atoms in our body just disperse. They become part of the soil, become part of the air, become part of the oceans, and eventually our atoms will become parts of other people. So if you could label each one of your atoms with your social security number and follow it after your death, you would find that some of your atoms became part of the soil, some of them became part of the air, some of them became part of the water, and eventually you would find some of your atoms in other people. If you look at individual atoms, our individual atoms will persist. They will continue, and they will become parts of other structures and parts of other living beings, parts of animals, parts of plants. There's some atoms in my body right now that probably were part of Galileo or part of Genghis Khan or even part of Lao Tzu. So the atoms continue. But I don't think that that's the same as consciousness. I think consciousness requires a lot of neurons and a lot of connections between them, and that's a very special arrangement of atoms.
Although scientists have conducted considerable research on the brain, many questions are still unanswered. Especially mysterious is the relationship between the brain and consciousness.
We know a lot about the brain, but there are a lot of things that we don't know about the brain. We don't really understand what consciousness is, for example, which is to me is one of the greatest mysteries of science. What is it that gives us this feeling of having a self, of having an ego, of being a being that is separate from the rest of the universe? What is it that gives us that feeling? Somehow it's produced by all of the electrical and chemical exchanges of the neurons. But how? We don't understand that. So it's a wonderful mystery in science, and maybe mystery in the humanities as well. What is consciousness? And how does it come about? Can we build a computer that is conscious? Could we build a computer that had enough artificial neurons that it could think? Could we build a computer that is aware of itself? These are great questions that we don't know the answer to yet.
Cherished viewers, we'll take a moment now to thank the divine for the magnificent universe in which we live. We'll be back after the following message. Please stay tuned to Supreme Master Television. Welcome back to our program as Dr. Alan Lightman shares his thoughts on the relationship between science and spirituality.
I think that the scientific world, or the physical world, and the spiritual world are separate. I think they have their separate domains of validity. I think they are both important to us as human beings. But I think that the material world and the spiritual world have separate domains. They come together in individual people because I consider myself a spiritual person and I'm also a scientist. So within me, there is both a spiritual side and a material side.
In addition to being a distinguished scientist, Dr. Lightman has had spiritual experiences for which there is no scientific explanation. For example, one summer, he had a life-altering encounter with two wild ospreys.
The experience that I had was that the two young ospreys that had watched me all summer as they were growing up in their nests not far from my house. When they took their first flight, they began flying straight towards me, and I was on an upper deck of my house. I got about 10 or 20 feet away. They suddenly did an acceleration, an upward turn, and went up and over the house. But for a split second before they did that acceleration up and over the house, they made eye contact with me. I'd been watching these baby ospreys grow up all summer long, and I've never had any communication with any animal that was that intense. And I felt in that split second, they were telling me that we're brothers. We have shared this land together, and go in peace. And it was a wonderful feeling, a kinship with these wild animals, that we were all living beings sharing this piece of land together. It was an incredible experience.
On another occasion, Dr. Lightman also had a life-altering spiritual experience. It occurred late one night in Maine, USA, as he was returning home by boat.
I was coming back alone in my boat one night after midnight. There were no other boats on the water. It was very dark, clear sky. And I lay down in the boat and turned off the engine, and it got even quieter. And I just looked up at the stars. And after a few moments, I felt like I was falling into infinity. I felt like I was part of something much bigger than myself. I felt a connection not only to the stars, but to all of nature. That was what I would call a spiritual experience or transcendent experience, where I lost all track of my body and where I was and what time it was, and just felt this connection. And for me, that's what spirituality is, that feeling of being part of something larger than ourselves, of being connected to the whole cosmos.
Dr. Lightman explains that in order to have a deeper understanding of the wonders around us, we need to spend more time in nature.
I think that our modern life has pushed us away from nature. You go into a park where people are walking in a beautiful place and you see them talking on their smartphones instead of just looking around and appreciating the beauty, the natural beauty of where they are. I think that our modern lifestyle is too fast, that we're always rushing from A to B without taking time to just be present and appreciating the moment, of slowing down and just appreciating where we are and who we are. I think that our high-speed communication devices have made us feel like we need to be plugged into the grid all the time, and that is also taking us away from the moment, from the present, from just appreciating where we are. We need time to think about who we are and where we're going and what our values are. And those moments of reflection require quiet. They require slowness.
Dr. Lightman has been widely recognized for both his scientific and philanthropic endeavors. In 2006, he received the John P. McGovern Science and Society Award for outstanding contributions to both science and society. In 2008, he received a gold medal for humanitarian service from the Cambodian government. Despite his international recognition, Dr. Alan Lightman remains both humble and grateful.
I'm grateful to my good fortune. Above my desk upstairs, I have a big poster, and it has a picture of about 25 different people who have been influential to me and have helped me in my life. Some of them were teachers, some of them professors, some of them helped me with my work in Cambodia and Southeast Asia. And I have a picture of each one of these people. Some of them have passed away now. But I keep this poster above my desk so that every day I can look up and feel gratitude towards them for helping me in my life. And it's something that I recommend to everyone, to think of the people in your life that have helped you, have inspired you, and get pictures of them and put them together someplace where you can look at them every day so that you can feel gratitude every day.
Many thanks, Dr. Alan Lightman, for your insights about the impermanence of life and the wonders of our universe. We wish you continued success and spiritual upliftment. Kind-hearted viewers, thank you for your company today. Coming up next is Successful Refugees and Immigrants Leading the Way, Part 1, the legendary George Soros, right after noteworthy news. Through the grace of the divine, may you grow each day in inner beauty, nobility, and wisdom.
Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule and suprememastertv.com/SS